मैं तनिया जी से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वो निर्मला जी को फूल देकर सम्मानित करें।
Good afternoon, everybody. Especially after a lunch break, to have a session like this. I've normally felt post-lunch sessions, if anything, are a test for the speakers more than the audience. How to keep the audience, out of their drowsiness, which is natural post-lunch, especially on a monsoon afternoon. But I suppose the topic itself is so dear to all our hearts. I think my test will be less trying. In fact, when some of you all came to meet me, the first thing I said was the topic was itself negatively posed. I'm not holding it against anybody because the mood of the nation is like that. You tend to, present the reality. But like the mainstream media, about which all of us understand, it takes a while to put your point across, especially if you're from BJP. The conditioning today is we start all our debates, not just the televised debates, any discussion, any dialogue, or any discourse on political matters from a plank of start with the Congress kind of a mindset. I'm happy because I've got used to it, but I'm unhappy because I've still failed to break it. Because I think it's high time this country addresses issues of politics, society, economy, public policy, and all such related from either the subject matter point of view, which is fairly neutral and justifiable, or from the point of view of, irrespective of party, take a line that the nation needs to, address such issues, and therefore we talk about it. So you're either pedagogic if you're looking at it from just the subject, sociology, economics, or public policy in practice or whatever, or you take a position saying today India is suffering and therefore we need to talk about why there is a policy paralysis, is there a need to shift from political loyalties or whatever. But here we've gone on the trodden path, which is what the media is largely doing. Never mind, I'm not, as I said, blaming anybody, but coming on that route, therefore you will sound with any argument that you're going to project or place before a very discerning audience will sound jaded. Oh, you're saying the same things which we've already heard, say something new. That line would come the moment you start hearing anybody speak on this matter. But I'm sure you get the point, and therefore I won't harp on it for much longer. The fact is, today, I'll repeat myself to start with, the mood of the country is so against the ruling dispensation, the party or the parties which are in power. And therefore, by going by the usual route, if I were to say, the very same arguments on the basis of which you're going to reject the Congress or the UPA are in reverse the very same arguments for which we would say so the BJP. So it's easier to place arguments in that route. UPA and the Congress have, disappointed us on X criteria. Therefore, BJP would handle that criteria better. It will be, taking a mirror image of everything and arguing. Even today, when the media or the people who are very critical of public policy, critical not as criticism, but who critically appraise situations, look at the government in power, irrespective of the party, and say, this is no good, you have to do something in some other way. They could be talking about a particular policy, it could be GST, it could be direct taxation code, it could be anything, and then say you have to do it differently. So a section which is a very discerning, critical section of thinking public have all, during those 6 years of NDA period, have also done the same critical appraisal as it was in power, sharing and also governing the country. So whether you're looking at the media or looking at the critical public appraisal of NDA during its 6 years, similar exercises happened. We have not been treated with a kid glove. We have not been treated with, oh, they've just come to power, they've come newly, whereas the Congress has lasted in this country for 6 years, so let's be kind to them. No, that wasn't given. That advantage was never given to the NDA when they were in power. And therefore, if you were to look at the 6 years and the way in which a lot of things started happening, I think the BJP led NDA had very clearly shown the nation that it is a party which had ideas and therefore could do a lot of things without bringing in upheaval. Why am I saying the upheaval line? I'm saying the upheaval line only because from then till today, you have heard a lot of people talk about why the Planning Commission. I'm taking an example straight away so that I don't waste your time. Why, for instance, the Planning Commission is not necessary for this country, especially post 1990. Even before that, it wasn't, but for a minute, I'll give the advantage to them. One, technically, it is not a constitutionally provided body. Second, it's a body, because it was not constitutionally provided and because of some statutory backing, it ran the way it ran, especially after having opened up the economy. You didn't really require this kind of a centralized planning, top up, and then coming top down and reaching the district level. Looking at it in a way, the planning body was dispensing such monies which really didn't get into the accounting books. Later on, it widened and bulged so much that you find that now so much more than what was envisaged earlier by the Planning Commission or the government is being sanctioned to state governments by an authority which is not even constitutional, whereas the chief ministers who are constitutionally elected, heads of large sections of Indian, crores of Indians who voted for them for each state, are coming with a begging bowl to a body which is not even authorized by the constitution. Now, this is a very convenient arrangement. Media, which is very objective, desperately wanting to project objectivity, which is truly their business, they should do it also. But are they doing it completely is a different argument. But when they ask you a question saying, why didn't you then remove the Planning Commission during your NDA days, would be the pet question, because I've come up with an argument. And to defeat that argument, the media would immediately ask me as to why the NDA failed to remove it. That is why I took this example to say NDA tried a lot of things without causing an upheaval. If it was going to just throw away the Planning Commission, you would, in a political environment, create a feeling of twofold. One, the opposition parties would say, you have a hidden agenda. You have something to say that you want to do, as favoritism or anything like that. The other angle would be, there is a setup which is running whether you like it or not. Is it necessary for us to totally remove it or gradually understand how it can be in a phased manner removed and then look at what was otherwise constitutionally provided? Here, what I want to just explain in a very brief way is, in the place of Planning Commission, the constitutional authorities, the makers of the Constitution, had only the Finance Commission, which is an authorized constitutional body to deal with large-scale planning of resources, allocation, and that had to be every now and then looked into, advised into, given inputs into, and also checked and accepted by the National Development Council, which is the NDC, which consisted of chief ministers, ministers in the central cabinet, and there is a very large body which is the National Development Council. So what the Planning Commission was doing is partly some job of the Finance Commission, almost wholly of the NDC, and justifying its presence. If the NDA were to remove it and have the Finance Commission in its place, the disturbance in terms of suspicion in the minds of people, removal of existing practice, all at one go would have upset and brought in an upheaval. But that the NDA did not do. So, but that doesn't mean it did not generate enough debate from then and start questioning issues which have a deep root in our democratic practices, deep root into our constitutionally provided democratic practices. So institutional strengthening happens when you recognize the place of an institution, its authority, as sanctioned by the Constitution, and then try to supplement it, use it, empower it, benefit from it, all that would happen. Whereas a Planning Commission which has been in place gradually usurped the authority of what was constitutionally provided, and the NDA maximum could only talk about it gradually. Today, you have an environment where lots of people are talking about it. I've just taken the example of one to say that 6 years of NDA, several such things have slowly but steadily been brought to the public knowledge so that institutions which are provided by constitution can be strengthened and benefited from, rather than displacing them or through the back door bringing some other institution to undermine the existing constitutionally provided body, so that things that you do escape a large accountability framework. Another example, which I don't need to elaborate in this principle or the yardstick that I'm putting in front of you, is the way in which NAC was brought in. NAC, till 2006, all of you all know, just ran as though it was the authority for a de facto member of parliament, which in the place of the ministries was giving drafted bills which came to the cabinet, which later on with the ministry concerned, for you know the way in which a drafted bill goes through vetting process and then finds its form in which it comes to the cabinet again for a final approval and then gets tabled in the parliament, post which it goes to a standing committee and all that. But before it is tabled in the parliament, a bill normally gets drafted by the concerned ministry. So if you were doing something in rural development, the rural development ministry will do a drafting of the first bill, and that would be vetted by the law ministry. Then it will come back to the parent ministry, which is the rural development ministry, and then that bill will go to the cabinet. The cabinet will have a look at it and assume, therefore, I'm putting it here very carefully, assume, therefore, that the legality is checked up, the financial burden is factored in, how much money you would need to have this effectively implemented as a bill if it became an act. Then you will also look at the way in which answerability is built into it, who's going to be the nodal ministry, who's going to be able to answer for it, and so on. All this would be done by the toing and froing of this draft bill between the parent ministry and the law ministry back to the parent ministry and then to the cabinet. But when the NAC came in, the drafting was done by maybe very, very bona fide, well-intended activists who did not possibly appreciate this toing and froing, and therefore in their enthusiasm went about building bills which finally couldn't be put into the framework of accountability, financial sustainability, and so on. And therefore the example of food security bill, which 3 times had to be rejected. There is no politics between Manmohan Singh and Sonia in this. It's clearly, maybe that is also there, but clearly a drafted bill which has an intention of bringing in food security couldn't just find a place for itself in the larger jigsaw of governance, because the ministries found it, one, probably unsustainable in terms of finance. 2, the law ministry found it probably that it couldn't be justifying many other things legally, and therefore it had to go back, have the works done again, and come back again. Now, how much time is being wasted of the executive in having to tailor make that bill, had it only been an exercise within the framework of the government? You may like the bureaucracy, you may not like the bureaucracy, it's a part of the executive. It does its job if with good political guidance. If your political guidance is not ready to guide through the established constitutionally approved routes, you will suffer this. And in the first term of UPA 1, you saw this NAC probably playing just the advisory role till about 2006, because the CPM also was actively engaged with the government in terms of livelihood, in terms of poverty, where they probably project themselves. And largely the media also accepts that role, that they take care of the impoverished sections of the society. Well, every political party will have to, and they will have to seek their vote from impoverished sections to whom they have to serve. So that side is there. So you found that the ways in which the NDA approached policy, and I'll underline this, is well within the framework given by the Constitution, and there were no other backdoor operation or insidious ways of bringing in any kind of their agenda. Whereas today you find after 8 long years of UPA, the methods through which they attempt to govern us are not methods which are sanctioned by the Constitution. Appointment of CVC is the other example that I'll take. In spite of written objection by one member of the 3, elective electoral college for the CVC's position, they still went about doing it. Political courtesies don't exist. Written objections are not taken seriously. So, this, together with the backdoor operations, I therefore dare say that the NDA administration or the BJP-led administration, I'll also give you enough number of examples based on the BJP-run state governments. Methods are well within the framework of the Constitution, and there are no other methods adopted. I do not want to underline, I do not want to say devious, but sometimes some of them may be devious too, methods adopted by the UPA. That is one of the reasons why people who understand governance see the difference between the methods adopted in governance being transparent, answerable, and accountable when it is BJP-led governments. Whether they are state governments, now looking back, even during NDA. 2 other examples for today's practice. Not just during governance, but also during electoral times. We all believe, election commission is there, and therefore they will make sure that things are happening, fairly straightforward, and when they are not, they question them, they pull them up, and so on. Take the 2 examples. Farrukhabad, about which all of us have discussed a lot. I won't elaborate, but that is a relevant example, therefore I'm coming into it. You have by then very clearly understood that a state government like Andhra Pradesh had objected to religion-based reservation. You have the Union Law Minister himself knowing very well that in Andhra Pradesh, when the state government there, Congress government there, brought in the religion-based sub-quota into the OBC quota through an executive order, and certainly not through a legislation, it went to the court. From the High Court, where it was rejected, the case has reached the Supreme Court. It is still in the Supreme Court. So I'm not prejudging what the judges are going to say. But the matter is sub judice. You have a minister going to Uttar Pradesh and announcing that they would give 4.5% based on religion sub-quota in OBC. Matter is sub judice. He is the Union Law Minister. And when the Election Commission is approached by a political party, BJP in this instance, he says, well, I have said something which is going to be part of my manifesto. When the manifesto comes, it has no line on it, because they know when the written word is printed, they can't really be saying things which are against the matters which are in the court. It wasn't there. Then the Election Commission calls the law minister of the country to say, boss, what you've done is not right. You couldn't have done this. And that's how far the Election Commission went. Probably that's how far they can go. And if we have an objection, we can take it as a case to the courts to say it has violated the People's Representation Act. And therefore, you can wait for another 5 years for one court to say, then build on next higher court to say, and a final court to say, another 5 years later. But the fact is, this is the process through which the chiding happens when you go against the law. Chiding all that it is. Knowing very well the matter sub judice, this happened. Knowing very well certain things cannot happen in this country without a change in the law, you still use it as an electoral promise. I take the example of the recent by-election in Uttarakhand, where the chief minister contested and then he won. Post that, there was one other by-election in Sitaraganj, which is an area which is dominated by migrant Bengali population. I'm not talking about any regionalism or language or anything of that kind. I'm using that also as an example to say how during an electoral time, misleading the voter with an intention to get their vote happens by habit for the Congress. I've quoted the Farrukhabad incident. Now I'm quoting this one, which is the latest. A particular community during Mrs. Gandhi's time, after the war, Bangladesh war, that, running out of torture, certain sections of Hindu, Bengali, Bangladeshis came out, and then they were rehabilitated in this pocket of the Uttarakhand area. Now there, when you go to contest, the land which has been allotted to them is a tempting proposition on which the Congress gives a misleading promise, saying we'll ensure that it is a freehold property given to you. You can't have freehold when it is a government land allotted. You can hold it for perpetuity. You can probably live there as long as you want and cultivate, make your, farm profits out of it. But what they have done is that they've given a promise saying we'll make sure that we'll give you a freehold on it. Now, government allotted lands, especially for people who have come as migrants and for their settlement, even after 50, 60 years, that rule is one and the same for all the states in India. So Uttarakhand cannot change it at its level and think it's going to be acceptable for Government of India, for the President of India, whose approval is required for that change. Even if Uttarakhand Assembly today under the Congress decides to amend it, get it passed by the President of India, the dimension which the voter misses out on is it's not that. The President cannot give an approval for what otherwise is going to be applicable entire country on an allocation made to people, and that being changed to perpetuity, holding for perpetuity to freehold, which means you can sell, you can build multi-storied apartments, you can, have a, developers right over it and make profit out of change of land use. So many dimensions to it. All this cannot happen just for Uttarakhand. President, obviously, when they give the approval, will have to look at whether this is going to happen so in other states as well. Can it that easily change? But look at the way in which executive order was passed to give an impression, and even when the code of conduct, electoral conduct was applicable, and then the election commission had to tell them, no, you can't do it now because the election is on, you hold on. If you want to do an GO to be passed, a government order to be passed, it has to be after the election. After the election, I'm sure they will do it and put the voters to a sense of false security. Oh yes, this government's intention is very good, only the courts are rejecting it. Courts are rejecting what? It is provided in the Constitution in a particular way. And if it's against that, the courts are the guardians of the Constitution, so they will say, boss, you can't pass it like this. A shifting of decisions, blatant decision taken, the blame for which will go off to somebody, but it's not me. I'm all for giving this land to you, but the court is denying it. Is this not a misleading of voter? Total misleading of voter. And remember, during the Lokpal bill, at some point in time, again the law minister had said, we'll like to pass it. At that time, talking about the reservation based on religion. We'll like to pass it, we'll pass it. But it's up to the courts then. Again, an executive decision which you are taking consciously as a political party, a party which is voted to be in power and govern, what I may call legally not so sustainable decision, and then leave it for the public to say, I am the Robin Hood who wants to do the good, but it's the court which is rejecting. How unfair is it to mislead public and then maybe get the vote and subsequently say it's not my fault? I think the responsibility of a political party, which I think the BJP takes rather too seriously and good for us. We are open about many things. We say things, sometimes many of our own supporters feel, why are you being like this? Like the Congress adopts some ways. You have to come to power. You can't be a political party without coming to power. How long are you going to stay away from power? Very legitimate questions. But how far are we going to go in this exercise of, genuine information-based seeking of vote, seeking of trust? Again, therefore, the difference between the BJP and the Congress is the reason why I would think BJP better than the Congress. That's my second argument. Institution, weakening of institution, and therefore having unaccountable power and authority was one line on which I've explained. The second line I'm taking is the BJP approaches its issues with a nation first principle. I mean, can I do this for this country? Another example was that evacuee property. I'm sure some of you all would have captured it during the issues when they were talked about. In Uttar Pradesh, I think it was Lucknow or Allahabad, where the properties were there, evacuee property, which was becoming an amendment was being thought about. And then when the amendment was being thought about, people said it can't be done because evacuee properties are there all over the country. How will you amend it and then say it can be given to citizens who were not till now Indian citizens? Larger issues, I'm not going into it because it will take a while. But intention there again, not being, I wouldn't say malified, but not really being all that bona fide. We stood against it. There could be definitely a section of our population who thinks, how could you be against this? It will benefit some people. You will miss out on their votes. Never mind. BJP's approach is definitely not, I'll get a couple of votes here and therefore please I will do it at any cost. Because the wrath afterwards of how illegal it is or how unsustainable it is by the law will fall on us to answer, and BJP does not, at least very consciously, very clearly, take that route, and therefore why you should choose the BJP rather than the Congress. That's the third. Fourth, obvious argument, we have better ideas of managing the economy. I go back to NDA time, which again, many of you are aware, 3 consecutive years of drought. In spite of that, in a country where nearly 55% of all arable lands are dependent on rain, farmers really were suffering to a large extent. The government of India managed to divert a lot of food, which was food grain, which were stored in godowns in different parts of the country at its expense, central government's expense, to reach it out to the state governments and ask them to distribute it through the Antyodaya and many other schemes so that the poorest of the poor never left without, a handful of grain to take care of their household. Whereas what is happening today is public knowledge. All of you all know it. Food grains can rot. Supreme Court can say distribute it even if it is going to be for free. But you had ministers saying, oh no, impossible. We can't do that. We can't be distributing food grains for free. No way. Right? No way. But then subsidize that. No. So even when there is a direction from the government, from the court, we don't follow it. Fourth. Fifth, again, repeatedly we've been talking about honesty in stating things and in governance. Remember 2011 January, you had the finance minister, because of extreme pressure from political parties, having a separate press conference to talk about how he's going to take efforts to understand, to bring in laws to get the black money into this country. He said also that they will form 4 different groups to study. What more is there to study on it? I don't know, because lots of groups have given their inputs. He said we are going to have 4 different groups to study the issue and then work on it and get the money back. Till he was announced as the president candidate of the UPA, we did not hear anything more on it, except for, yes, we are seeing what best to do. We are also having this double taxation treaty signed with 52 countries, 63 countries, and so on. But all that on paper. Nothing actually has come back to this country. And recently we even heard that some top Congress officials, parties officials, were also linked with black money abroad. And one of the names given, correct me if I'm wrong, is of Abhishek Verma, who once upon a time was a Youth Congress activist. His father and mother have also been MPs, Congress MPs, and Swiss bank accounts were also spoken about. No activity taken at all. So, on proactive economic affairs, you don't have steps. On reactive and responsive kind of steps for economic management, you don't have anything which is out of the box. You're still talking in terms of, the socialist era of India, We'll do it in a certain particular fashion. We'll bring in laws which will even go back to taxing people 60 years backwards, but nothing new. At least the 6 years of BJP and NDA saw very vibrant, newer approaches. I wish it was even more. But certainly during NDA, there was no hesitation to touch newer, out of the box ways of thinking how to manage the economy. And therefore, I can elaborate on it far more than this. Defense policy. Vajpayee took so much interest in saying how the Look East policy, by which time it had come into play, how to develop it, how to further it, how to take it forward without any animus anywhere. But today we are so scared of China. Seshadriji was rightly pointing out just as we were seated here, saying the team will probably come back, which has gone to China now, because one of the participants, proposed participant, did not even get a visa from them because he is from Arunachal Pradesh. The External Affairs Ministry seems to be fairly laid back on issues related to foreign policy, even when it encroaches into our territory. They think anything which will deal with a particular aspect of the foreign policy will upset the entire framework itself. You're not going to affect your entire relationship with China if you say, how come you're denying visa to one of my residents who's from Arunachal Pradesh, which is a legitimate part of India. You're not denying visa for some other reason. To ask this also seems to be a big exercise, and they hesitate to take it. And therefore, I can elaborate on this kind of an angle with many more examples which pertain to the governance agenda of the UPA. I'm tempted also to add, you had this report on Manrega, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. The BJP has been repeatedly saying that money is going into Manrega, which does not get audited by the CAG. Let's be clear here. Manrega is not audited by the CAG. But what is the volume of money which is going through? And when social audits came up saying, no, money is not reaching the genuine beneficiaries. In fact, one of the US teams had looked at employment creation. Not more than 3 days has been given as employment available under the Manrega for a household in a year. That may be extreme. But our own exercises, BJP's own exercises, have shown that a big transformation on agricultural labor has taken place, which was not envisaged by the Manrega. Today, farm hands are not available in the fields. And if they have to be brought in, they have to be brought in from somewhere else. The kind of labor cost which a small farmer is putting up is unbelievable. Is this something which they envisaged? No. That is why when I said when NAC like body comes up with a bill, they don't look at what the collateral impact is going to be of any such a bill. And they just give it, and because it's come from NAC, government agrees, puts the money. And today, Indian rural environment, whether it is labor availability, whether it is the cost of farming, whether it is really the assurance for unemployed people during non-season, everything is questionable. And the report which the Prime Minister has released has actually got the raw data to tell us all this. And therefore, the Congress and the UPA's approach of the so-called inclusiveness with which they're going to allow India to grow has only denied enterprise, has only denied people who were otherwise seeing better education availability, better job prospects. And the misleading information with which this government has lasted 8 years has been telling us that in spite of the international financial meltdown, India is protected. India is safeguarded. But today, when the things have worsened and crystallized, they are saying, well, I'm sorry, probably Greece, probably Egypt, probably anything else is affecting us. When our export to Greece is probably 0.1%. When our trade activities with other European countries is not even substantial enough to affect us. So, misleading is something which this government is repeatedly doing. It doesn't have governance agenda clear in its head. It wants to continue to be in power. It is unable to keep its own allies happy. People are getting carried away because of the kind of promises that they give. These are arguments, therefore, which I would use to say no Congress. And therefore, going back to my first premise, these are the very arguments, put it in reverse, are the arguments for getting the BJP back in 2014. And with that, I thank all of you all to have patiently heard me all this while. One could elaborate longer than this, but then I think since you're a very educated and discerning audience, I'm sure you get the strain of my argument and the spirit with which one has tried to present it here. Thank you very much.
Madam, probably this question is again for you. Why is the BJP not on social media?
I'm not sure that's right. BJP, I think, if anything, I've heard some congressmen tell me, and I'm not naming any of them, in a very friendly kind of a tone, that your party is so active on social media. You know, actually, we are the envy of many other parties that we are very active in social media. I'm not sure whether we are the first step in it, whether we are instigating it, we are initiating it, we are the spark plugs for it. No. Probably it is because of y'all pushing us to do a lot of things. We are there, and therefore we are there much better than many other parties. So it's not as if, yeah. Yeah, there are various, I mean, that is another, the second point that I was going to make. It may not be BJP, Facebook on its own, but then Advani ji has his blog. There is also a Facebook entry. Then so is Nitin Gadkari ji, the president, and so is the BJP's own, page, and so on the communication Samvad cell and so on. There are various little avenues and windows through which the BJP's social media networking is happening. And of course, aside from this, state chief ministers also run their own, If you're looking at specific Twitter handle, I think no, there is no party's Twitter handle, but we all know Sushma ji runs her Twitter, Modi ji runs his, and to some extent I think Tarun Vijay is also active on, I exist on Twitter, but I'm not really live, or I'm not really active. So I think we are slowly entering in many ways. But the presence is more from the point of view of positions taken after a time gap. So it sort of defeats the purpose. You expect when you're on social media, like instant, this minute BJP has to say why it's not doing this or why it is doing a certain other. But I think given the time gap, one is able to approach it without any misconceptions. So the comfort zone is that little time gap. Instant responses, I think people are still very cautious that, post Sashita Roor's episode, everybody's being very cautious about immediately putting their viewpoint in the Twitter.
Why don't you have primary elections within BJP or within NDA to have a candidate, because this is a large country, to reach out to 120 crore people requires hell lot of time. And I think we're already short of the 2014 milestone. If we keep with this incrementalism, because this incrementalism led us to Kushwaha, which was really a big, upset for all the BJP supporters. So please take this advice that stop this incrementalism, look at the larger picture.
That is not done as though in isolation. State elections, whether for the Congress, whether for the Communist Party, whether for the BJP, for whichever party, cannot be in isolation. Otherwise, how would you, let us say, pull up the Congress based on their defeat in Uttar Pradesh? Congress also lost in Uttar Pradesh, not just us. You can tell me that incrementalism in BJP, Kushwaha, therefore you lost. For a minute, let me say I agree with you. For a minute. Although I'm going to definitely even disengage that argument. So, if state elections are also partly reflective of what is the national mood, you cannot ignore the outcome of a state assembly election and say, forget the state election, you can't go step by step, you're not going to look at only after acquiring 20 states will you win this nation. You can win the central government directly. These are, issues which you can tackle separately. Is absolutely inconsistent.
Ramesh Pokhriyal from stopping, spoiling the show. And I don't see, I'll tell you, Sumit won't allow further debate, but I'm sure we'll have it another day.
I'll just continue with your Nishank ji ka argument. I was there for the 2 months during the election. Please elaborate on it again.
Ghanduri's defeat, which was, almost a clear winner. And, your argument of incrementalism showing us the nation's mood is not valid because you are taking linearity and uniform nature, which for a philosophy and a student and a science student isn't the way how reality is governed.
First objection. Public mood, people's priorities while voting does not go on a scientific basis. And that is one of the reasons why psephologists have not ever succeeded in reading the Indian voters' mind. No, wait a minute. Real science in election has to come through in some way. It comes through your psephology. If it is not that, tell me, is there a set of scientists who are sitting in the CERN labs who are going to come here and tell us the same philosophy of the standard module? No, sir. Sociology and politics are very, very intermingled. Sociology and politics are so intermingled that your linear analysis or any other analysis will fall flat on its face when you're talking about the caste-based influences that we have even today, whether you like it or whether I like it. So there are factors which are not palpable, quantifiable, measurable by any one of your psephologists or anybody, quack or otherwise. And therefore, to assume that, and again, even going by the measures that you are trying to bring in for greater scientific sounding measure of elections, how can you prove that Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank spoiled the game in Uttaranchal? How are you able to prove that? Excuse me, he is my leader. He's part of my party. And I'm here now as a spokesperson of my party. And if there is any problem with anybody, the party has its internal mechanisms to set them right. You may not be even cognizant of what is going on within the party in terms of corrections which will happen, deviations which will have to be managed.
You can take a hands count here. Karnataka again is a big mess, all created because of poor leadership of Nitin Gadkari, and in spite of all repeated failures, he continues to be projected as the president for the next term. It is completely unacceptable, and I don't know, your antennas were up the moment you heard the word science, but that's not a positive sign really. I'm a science student. I'm an engineer from IIT Kharagpur and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. I've been in corporate world for about 13-14 years and been in the movement for about 2.5 years, very closely watching from the ground in 8 different states. And I can tell you very clearly that if you take your own video of the speech that you began with, by denying that Congress should not be used as a springboard or a bouncing board, but you are yourself going into that same trap. The moment I asked you that provocative question, you again made Congress as your plan to defy that Congress should be more worried.
You, in your enthusiasm to prove that you're trying to bring in a great deal of science into this, you seem to be losing sight that you're not the first person to talk about scientific methods in politics. The science in politics, which is studied under the humanities, still has its own measures of looking at behavioral practices of people who make up for voters, which is you and me. Your science is welcome, sir, and one is not frightened of that. But science has to be tempered down to understand that what you do in science in a perfect lab setting does not work in a ground level constituency where priorities are based on many other things which include sentiment about my own man who's contesting, who belongs to my community. And therefore, there, that perfect ceteris paribus of your lab will not work. And therefore, your science is welcome, your criticism is very welcome. I will hear it. I'll also probably give the feedback to my party because it has to benefit from your scientific thinking, but accommodate, first of all, that there are many unseen, unknown to you factors which play up for a decision making in a party. So many things which you are not privy to, which I am not privy to, also influence decision making. And not just because I am a party spokesperson, particularly of the BJP, but also because at a personal level, I think your judgment about Mr. Gadkari is completely wrong. A person who has come from outside Delhi to understand the politics in Delhi, to run a national party which, with a very transparent ways of taking decision making, is available for you, me, and the media, to, as opposed to what is happening in a very secretive and guarded way in Andhra Pradesh, itself should be giving you a lot of answers for the questions that you are persistently asking me. Because if you put the same measure of what is happening in Karnataka versus what is happening in Andhra Pradesh, many more questions will be relevant.
True.
And I go back for your convincing, you're going back to talking about Congress in spite of what I've said there at the beginning. Congress is also a national political party against whom we are fighting, so I can't ignore them. So ask the same questions that you asked of me as regards Karnataka's political decision making that my party president takes in an open, transparent manner, consulting every MLA there. It may not give us best of imagery. It may not make me be perceived as a better managed party. It might give me a mixed view from the public. It might make my party feel as if, why can't I handle it better? There are lessons for us to learn, no doubt. But to have to thrash BJP's decision making just because it is visible for you, and just because what the opposite is not visible for you in Andhra Pradesh, for instance, to think that you can pass a judgment saying useless president so and so, I'm sorry, that's a bit too much.
Being a doctor also, 90% people want change in government. They want the replacement. More than 90 you can say, but 90% is a fair guess. Can BJP replace Congress? That is the question. Because it is topical to the topic.
I agree. Yes, I'm glad you're asking that question. And I've, in fact, the first line I said at the beginning was, because the mood of the nation is what it is now, even the question or the topic of the discussion of this particular session was beginning from, okay, if not Congress, who else? How the BJP? And in fact, I even give a lot of respect to that much debated issue of Advani ji post Mumbai National Executive, saying the BJP should rise, why hasn't it risen, to capture the popular mood. As a very seasoned elder, he did observe that if the mood of the nation is going against Congress, the BJP should do a lot more to be able to stand up and meet it. It was a very genuine feeling about the party. And therefore, that question that you ask is on similar lines. The party will have to do a lot more, and I'll concede that, a lot more to manage perceptions and also to be genuinely taking up a lot more issues, specifically on, say, economy, specifically on what the failures of the Congress are, specifically on what we will do when we come to power in 2014, and so on. No doubt on that. Can is not the question. That we should is the question. Otherwise, we have a very big danger in this country that unless there is a national party, unless there is a party which, even if it doesn't come singularly to power, even if it comes only as a result of a coalition, will not have the direction to lead this country, especially now that we are at a crossroads. We are at a crossroads in the sense that decision making is suffering, there is paralysis, there is absolutely no going forward happening on any front. And therefore, yes, it's not can, it's more that we should, because it's timely. Obviously, that follows. That follows, and that's why I said there are a lot of works happening which you'll little by little get to see. But can is not the issue, we should is my argument.
Going by the scenario of journalism these days, is it the media that's deciding the issues?
Yes, to an extent. If you look at the way in which issues get prioritized in terms of occupying a national debating space or pushing agendas for decision making, yes, to a large extent, I would say some issues do get prioritized based on the way in which the media prioritizes it. But that doesn't mean all of them find their logical conclusion. They do float along, or they do rise with the media pressure, with the media priorities. But after a point, what I would call the typical Indian strength prevails, where they put to the usual debates, discussions, arguments, and then the usual competent authorities, whether it is the parliament, whether it's the court, whether it's the public, they take over it. And some are left off midway, some are taken further, and very few probably reach the logical conclusion. So, like many other segments of the society which take up an issue, the media also does take up issues. And sometimes it may even give us an appearance or make us have a kind of a feeling that media probably is setting the agenda. But I'm not sure it completely does that. Yes, sometimes it does, but going through the usual process of Indian arguments, dialogue and debate, and competent authorities which take up the issue because of the pressure, they do remain in the high priority for some time, but after a while they also wilt away, wither away, die away without finding a logical conclusion. But some luckily last longer. Very few find a logical end.
Madam, probably this question is again for you. Why is the BJP not on social media?
I'm not sure that's right. BJP, I think, if anything, I've heard some congressmen tell me, and I'm not naming any of them, in a very friendly kind of a tone, that your party is so active on social media. You know, actually, we are the envy of many other parties that we are very active in social media. I'm not sure whether we are the first step in it, whether we are instigating it, we are initiating it, we are the spark plugs for it. No. Probably it is because of y'all pushing us to do a lot of things. We are there, and therefore we are there much better than many other parties. So it's not as if, yeah. Yeah, there are various, I mean, that is another, the second point that I was going to make. It may not be BJP, Facebook on its own, but then Advani ji has his blog. There's also a Facebook entry. Then so is Nitin Gadkari ji, the president. And so is the BJP's own, page. And so on, the communication Samvad cell and so on. There are various little avenues and windows through which the BJP social media networking is happening. And of course, aside from this, state chief ministers also run their own, If you're looking at specific Twitter handle, I think no, there is no party's Twitter handle. But we all know Sushma ji runs her Twitter, Modi ji runs his. And to some extent, I think Tarun Vijay is also active on. I exist on Twitter, but I'm not really live, or I'm not really active. So I think we are slowly entering in many ways. But the presence is more from the point of view of positions taken after a time gap. So it sort of defeats the purpose. You expect when you're on social media, like instant, this minute BJP has to say why it's not doing this or why it is doing a certain other. But I think given the time gap, one is able to approach it without any misconceptions. So the comfort zone is that little time gap. instant responses, I think people are still very cautious that, post Sashita Roor's episode, everybody's being very cautious about immediately putting their viewpoint in the Twitter.
Ask the channels to give you a guaranteed time space. They call 8, 9 people, especially one channel, and keep you on one corner and allow you one question, and thereafter there are plenty of course rebuttals there, and you don't get across your point of view as fiercely as you have put right now. We want you to argue.
We need to argue, we need to capture that space. We can't beg off them. We have to demand and we have to get that space. But that's something which has to be done by all of us individually and also through the party. I agree. We need to get that space.